Okay, welcome back to the channel. I had a TikTok video go viral, and so I'm going to do a more detailed explanation of what we're talking about. This started with a video, it was a clip from the podcast where we were talking about spending $10,000 for a truck or less and putting up to $40,000 in it to get it ready to haul freight. That's the model. That's the lunatic model. This TikTok hit 1 million views and went viral. So, as you can imagine, as TikTok comment sections go, it was rowdy. Oh, I don't believe it, blah, 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 blah. So I made another smaller one just to hit the numbers. I'm going to break that all down for you here in this video. Now, you've got to have a little bit of context to fully understand why we did it the way that we did it with this truck, because this was kind of a culmination of things. So let's go back to 2018 real quick, and when I come to Larry, March of 2018. He has a truck shown here. It's a black 2005 Columbia that he got from a guy because the motor had blown up. So they do a deal. Larry acquires the truck, takes it to the Detroit shop, spends about 30 grand, putting a motor in it, OPS, doing all the stuff. I get in the truck. Over the next probably 90 days, we just ended up doing a lot of little stuff to it, just a little stuff here and there. I needed a brake chamber. I needed a radiator hose. Nothing was catastrophic and nothing put the truck out of service. It was just little nitpicky stuff that you would think the certified professionals at the dealership would have caught, but they didn't. They just took broken stuff off and put broken stuff back on. That was 2018. 2019, we added 2 more trucks. 2020, we added a couple more trucks. And what we started to learn was we thought, you know what, we would probably be better off and more profitable if we just got everything right before we started hauling freight. Because up to that point, we would get a truck in the system, we would get it DOT legal, which means it would pass a rigorous Landstar inspection, and we'd start hauling freight with it. And if we needed to do stuff, we'd just do it on the weekends, on restarts, 10-hour breaks, whatever, which was fine as long as I was driving it. So we would bring it in and I would jump in it and I was running that dedicated run. And so I could kind of shake it down and bring it back. Okay, well, this weekend we need to get this, that, and the other done. What I started to notice was that we were taking the tires off multiple times. And I thought, wouldn't it make more sense to just take the tires off once and then go through? Let's just do the shocks and the brakes and the bearings and the bushings and do all that stuff first so that we don't have to keep doing something, which is not a big deal to take a tire off, but it's still unnecessary labor. So 2020 happens, and Zeke, my best friend, made some good investments in cryptocurrency. And so he comes to me and he's like, well, you know, I'm thinking about buying a truck. And he's showing me all these trucks because he's got about $40,000, $50,000. And he's looking at all these trucks and I'm going, yeah, man, I know it looks good. It looks good, because that was the thing that kept tripping him up. Well, man, this truck looks great. I'm like, yeah, but what about under the hood? What about the frame? What about the bushings and the bearings? All the stuff we're going to have to do anyway. Remember that. Don't forget that a brand new truck rolling off of the assembly line has a bad alignment. Every single one. So you take a truck that's got 500,000 plus, I promise you, the spring bushings are worn out and you can't get a good quality alignment. So you're going to have to do spring bushings and tie rods and your drive shafts and U-joints. All that stuff is probably worn out. Well, it's only got 500. Trust me, that stuff's worn out. All right. It's going to need attention. Even if it's not completely wore out, it's 3/4 wore out and it's going to have to be replaced soon, or it's going to cause big problems. So I told Zeke, I said, look, man, just go find the cheapest truck you can find, take Carl with you, have Carl look it over. And so he did that, I want to say 2 or 3 times. He went and looked at 2 or 3 different trucks, and Carl Bonecutter, Dr. Carl Bonecutter, would be like, yeah, no, and Carl would find stuff that he didn't like. Well, Zeke finds this truck for $5,500 in Columbus, Ohio. Takes Carl up there, and they're selling it because it has a bad transmission. So Carl goes over it and under it, and if you've never been with Carl on one of his truck inspections, it is a sight to see. Well, the problem was it didn't have low range. It had high range. Well, Carl gets under the truck and starts messing around with the wires and comes out and tells Zeke, hey, don't ask any questions, just pay the man. because Carl realized that the transmission wasn't as big of an issue as what they thought. So he's like, dude, pay the guy. So he pays the guy, and they tow the truck about, I don't know, 130 miles or something to Carl's house and drops it off. So this is May of 2020. We have the truck. It is ugly. It is dirty. I think they got 3 or 4 contractor bags full of trash out of this truck. So we just ripped the interior out. Took the seats out, junked those, took the bed out. And Zeke and I spent almost an entire day with a pressure washer and scrub brush just going over the floor and cleaning and cleaning and cleaning because it was nasty. Again, the great thing about the Columbia Century is if you've got a T25 Torx bit screwdriver, you can have the whole dash out of the thing in 30 minutes. So we tear the whole dash out and we clean. And it had issues. The turbo was junk. Of course, this is why we have Carl. Hey, what you gonna do about this? Carl found some play in the turbo. And he's like, hey man, I really think we should put a turbo on it. So we put a turbo on it. We did the Pittsburgh Power exhaust manifold. We did the Pittsburgh Power damper and balancer. We put a Fleet air filter on it. We put an OPS on it. We put a Pittsburgh Power muffler on it. Carl went through and did all the spring bushings, brakes, tires. We swapped it from junk duals over to Michelin wide-base, low rolling resistance drive tires. Fixed all kinds of stuff. Replaced all the rubber lines, except for a couple, and that'll come back to us here in a minute. The plan was to replace anything rubber on the truck. There was 2 that got missed, and they ended up coming out and biting us later. But remember, this whole thing with this truck, this is the first time we've done it this way. This is the first time that we have basically set a truck on jack stands and said, all right, we're not going to haul freight with it until it's done. So Carl gets it in May, June, July comes around. See, he's had it about 6 or 8 weeks. Well, we got the transmission fixed. What it ended up being was a pin came out of the synchronizer and got lodged on the back side of the transmission so that the synchronizer could not move back and forward to get into low range. Carl gets the transmission fixed. We get everything back together, and I take it up the road, and there is this awful squealing noise when you get on the throttle. And we're like, what in the world is this noise? And no, we couldn't figure it out. And I drive it. And we're like, this has got to be a transmission problem because you can hear it from underneath. And every time you get on the gas, it was this squealing noise. And we're like, great. So I took it to another shop that specializes in transmissions. And they're like, yeah, we think we need to put a transmission in. All right. So it's got a Rockwell, which has an electric over air shifter, which I'm not a fan of. We have them swap it from a Rockwell to an Eaton, which was about $7,000. About that time, there was another truck that broke down in Tennessee. So I jump in this truck and take off. Well, guess what? The squealing noise is still there. So now we spent all this money on a transmission that we probably didn't need. I grab an empty trailer and I haul ass to Tennessee to rescue this other truck and get him going. And he goes and drives this truck for about a week. So everything is pretty much doing okay, but we still got this weird squealing noise I can't find. So I get the truck back, I bring it back home, found it. And it was a rubber silicone line on the EGR crossover tube that was leaking boost. And it was supposed to have been replaced, and somehow it got missed. So this thing cost $20. So because we missed this one $20 hose, we ended up putting a $7,000 transmission in it we didn't need to. Okay, so keep that in mind when we're talking about the $40,000 that he spent to get this truck on the road. About $7,000 of it was completely unnecessary. So we start hauling freight. And we put the truck in service in July. In October, we had another boost issue. And again, struggling to find it. Now, I'm not physically seeing the truck at this point because he's out on the road, but he's telling me he's got this problem. The driver comes to West Virginia to check it out. I thought I had found it. We thought we had found it, that the gasket between the turbo and the manifold was leaking. So we pulled the turbo off of it, put a gasket on it, driver takes off. Well, now the boost problem's even worse. I had told the driver, because he had heavy load, I'm like, dude, you're going to have to stay off 68, I-68, Northern Maryland. you're going to have to run the turnpike. We'll just have to eat the tolls because, you know, you're not getting max boost, which means you're going to cause a lot of excess heat in the turbo. Well, he got confused. He didn't think that he could take the load that he had across the turnpike because of hazmat. So he ducks down and goes across 68. Well, then the truck gets back, and now the turbo is warped, and you can see a gap. Well, what we found out was there was a second rubber hose that connects the charge air cooler to the intake that I thought had been replaced. We were sure we had paid for it. For whatever reason, it didn't get replaced, and it was leaking boost, and it just got worse and worse and worse. So what happened was the turbo got so hot that it warped the exhaust housing of the turbo. Well, fortunately, the place we got the turbo from, I explained to him what happened, and he just got me a new exhaust housing. So we just took the turbo apart, put the exhaust housing on it, fixed the boost leak, and the truck's been fine ever since. So when you look, one, at the $40,000 initial investment, there was a $7,000 transmission that didn't need to happen. And if you're wondering why that's expensive, more so than normal, it's because the length of the Rockwell and the length of the Eaton are different. So you had to redo drive shafts, and, you know, it was a big operation. So there was 2 weeks in October that the truck set with this turbo issue that wouldn't have had to set had we found, or had we replaced these 2 boost hoses that probably together are $300 and take 5 minutes to change. But again, this is the first time we did this. I didn't have a good checklist. I learned a hell of a lot from this deal of how to go about this in a linear fashion so that everything could be checked off on like a damn race car, you know. But just throwing one on jack stands and throwing parts at it, if you're not doing it in a specific order, something could get missed, and that's what happened. Also, the $10,000 maintenance number after we put the truck in would also have been reduced had we not had to spend some of the money and labor and time on chasing this boost leak, taking the turbo off twice, and rebuilding the turbo, basically. So that's probably worth a couple of grand right there. So we can almost take $10,000 off of this. And really probably more, because sometime in 2022, we had a drive shaft come apart, fortunately in a parking lot. So it didn't do any damage. It just unrolled like a roll of biscuits. Probably should have put a new tube on that drive shaft from the carrier bearing to the front drive axle. Would have been an upfront cost of, I don't know, $1,500, but it would have been a lot cheaper than the truck having to set 12 days in Pennsylvania, a tow bill, the cost of the drive shaft, all that. It would have been cheaper. So that would have brought it down even further. So if not for our mistake, and had we replaced that drive shaft from the beginning, that $10,000 cost in maintenance would probably have been $3,000 to $5,000, right? So this truck was purchased for $5,500. It took us about 2 months to get it on the road. It made $315,000 in revenue. That's what it earned from July of 21 to July of 22. It paid a driver $90,000 in that time, but paid Zeke $55,000 in that 12 months, and he paid his maintenance out of that. But he didn't have to do anything except answer the phone a few times and say, hey man, I need to pay for this bill. We did all the dispatching. We hired the drivers. We paid the payroll. We did all the dispatching. All he had to do was buy the truck, pay to get it ready, and get a check every week. Now, obviously the big picture there is for him to have 5 of these. Okay? So in a year, he had a truck net him around $40,000 for doing nothing, completely passive income. Well, what if he had 5 of them? What if he had 5 of them that only made him $25,000? That's $125,000 a year for doing nothing. We do all the work. We dispatch. We find drivers. We answer the phone in the middle of the night. He doesn't have to take those calls. I do. So truck pays the driver $90,000, pays Zeke $55,000. We made $48,000. That was our portion of the profit, you know, was we had to get paid for our input here. The big picture is This truck earned a profit from July of 21 to July of 22 of $193,000. Okay? Let's think about that. If one driver bought it, paid the $5,500, and then paid it and owned it, and then one driver owned it and one driver dispatched it, one person was involved in all of this, and there would have no blue ribbon, no Zeke, just one guy that does the same thing, the profit for driving that truck 122,000 miles in 12 months is $193,000. The average owner-operator, according to ATBS, made $69,000. We made $193,000 profit. Now, was the market super high? Absolutely. But the expenses were super low. The truck was paid for, no payments. The fuel on that truck was 18% of total revenue. 18%. That's insane because we had the best fuel mileage driver in that truck. There were 2 drivers in that truck in that time period, full time. Our best fuel mileage guy ever drove that truck for probably 9 months or so. The fuel call or the fuel mileage on that truck for that time period was 7.25. We spent $62,000 in fuel on 122,000 miles. The fuel cost was 51 cents. Okay, well, we got to a point in 2022 where the fuel surcharge was 57. So the fuel cost for that truck for 1 year was 51 cents a mile. All right, we did about $2.58 per mile, all miles, from July of 21 to July of 22, $2.58 a mile. 51 cents of that was fuel. So then the only thing we have to pay out of that other $2 is the driver, the maintenance, the fixed costs. We know that the fuel was $66,000 out of that $315,000. We know that we paid the driver. So 190 grand for a single truck owner operator, leased a Landstar. If you just work the damn thing full time and watch your expenses and go for maximum profit, $193,000 profit. So that's the story in a nutshell, where we took a $5,000 truck. Yes, it's ugly. It's got a great driver's seat, and Zeke bought a fantastic bed, one of those big fancy memory foam mattresses. But it's got a brand new seat. It keeps all the rain out. It keeps the heat out, and it keeps the cold out. It's ugly. Yes, it's loud. No, it's not as comfortable as a 2022. But why don't you run on down to the dealership and go into the waiting room, and all those people that have been sitting there 3, 4, 5, 6 weeks waiting on parts, ask them what year and model their truck is. Promise you it's not going to be a 2007. So this truck is still operating. There's a driver in it right now. And this truck will continue to operate. I mean, hell, it don't even use oil. We've had an OPS on it from day one. Every oil sample has come back clean. This truck's got just under 1.3 million miles on it, and it hardly uses oil. We have no idea if it's ever been in-framed. We have no clue. But the oil samples come back clear. The fuel mileage is great. We don't have any drivability issues. But what else could you want? To spend $40,000 to make almost $200,000. All right. So let's talk about the rates. Are the rates down right now as I record this in November of 2022? Yeah, they are. But imagine how low they can go before this truck stops making a profit. They can go pretty low. They can go under $2. They can probably go under $150 before this truck stops making a profit. So you just need to think about that, because what if rates go to $1.50? I don't think they will, but let's just think about it. What if the rates went to $1.50? Can you survive with your 2020 that's shiny and pretty and comfortable and pampers your butt and makes you feel like a big truck driver, this one can. It can still make a profit. So that's the story. That's it in a nutshell. That's the greater detail. You can certainly ask questions. I believe that I've covered it all. If we do, well, not if, when we do this again, Zeke has full plans of buying another truck. We'll probably do it better and cheaper than we did before because we learned a lot of lessons through this truck that will benefit us going forward into the next one. So there you go. That's the story of the $5,000 truck that made $200,000.